So good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for our third installment of the Fix That Home Repair series. My name is Jen Tremon, and I'm with the Atlanta Beltline Partnership. We are the nonprofit entity that supports the Atlanta Beltline, if you are not familiar with us already. The Fix That Home Repair series is a partnership with us, the Beltline Partnership, the Atlanta Community Tool Bank, Atlanta Land Trust, and House Proud. We started the series back in 2020 to help teach homeowners some basic home repair skills and tools so they can help save money on repairs and just really be safer inside of their homes. If you missed any of our series in 2020, we covered things like HVAC maintenance, plumbing, basic tool usage, and then of course, you see on your screen some of the ones that we did this year in 2021. If you missed any of those and you want to catch up, we have them on our website at beltline.org/empower. And you can also go there to view our current calendar of other workshops. Tonight, I'm super thrilled to be joined by our good friends at Trees Atlanta. They're a great friend of the Beltline. So thank you all that submitted questions ahead of time. We have built those into our presentation, and then we will allow some time for live questions as well. So before I turn it over to Susan with Trees Atlanta, I'm going to let the partners tonight say a quick hello. So Lisa, why don't you kick us off with a hello from House Proud.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lisa Flowers Jones. I'm the Executive Director of House Proud Atlanta. House Proud is a small nonprofit, and we provide no-cost repairs for seniors, the disabled, and veterans, anything to keep them warm, safe, and dry. So think roofing, plumbing, electrical, floor stabilization. Currently, we have dollars for veterans. So if you are a neighbor, is a veteran or a widow of a veteran, we do have funding for veterans. We also have some funding for Atlanta's West Side and for MPUV. That is the area around Pittsburgh, Mechanicsville, Summerhill, Adair Park, Peoplestown. So we're pleased and grateful to be here tonight. And thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. And Adrian, why don't you say hello from Atlanta Land Trust?
Hi, everyone. My name is Adrian Malden with the Atlanta Land Trust. We are stewards of permanently affordable housing within the city of Atlanta in close proximity to the Beltline. Thank you so much to all the partners for having us out here tonight. If you are an individual that is looking for affordable housing, I'd love to invite you all to our community information session, July 10th at 10 a.m. Our website is atlantalandtrust.org, and we look forward to seeing all of you there. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. And we are not joined tonight by the Atlanta Community Tool Bank, but they are a great nonprofit helping loan tools to community organizations, so definitely check them out. And with that, Susan, I will turn it over to you to talk to us about some trees.
Thanks, Jen. And thank you, Jen and the Beltline Partnership for inviting me tonight. I'm excited to share some tree care tips with you guys. Like Jen said, I used your questions to build my presentation, and I hope I can answer a lot of them in that presentation, but if I don't, we'll also have a chance for questions at the end. Okay, so Jen, I'm ready to share my screen. Okay, can I get a confirmation you can see it?
Looks great.
Okay, perfect, thanks. So my main role at Trees Atlanta is the Associate Director of Volunteer Services. I keep up my ISA certified arborist certification as well because I teach pruning classes for our staff and for our volunteers. For those of you who may not be familiar with Trees Atlanta, we are a nonprofit organization that's been around for about 35 years. And our mission is to protect and improve our urban forests through planting, conserving, and educating. We have a lot of educational programs available like this, and they are geared towards both adults and youth. So if you'd like to attend one of our tours or trainings or classes or camps or family activities, you can visit our website, treesatlanta.org, to get more information and to register. Also on our website is a resource page available with lots of different topics that may be of interest to you. So please check that out after this class and see if there are more topics that might be helpful for you in your own yard. So at the top menu, you just select resources, and there's a bunch of different topics that you can choose from. And some of them we're going to cover tonight. So we'll talk about the best and easiest ways to care for all trees. So things that you can do for any tree that will help them. I'll also touch on pruning trees, give you some tips for vine removal from trees. We'll talk about when you need a consulting or a professional arborist. I'm going to just share a few keynotes from Atlanta's current tree ordinance that pertains to homeowners, and then we'll have time for your questions. But before we jump into all of that tree care information, I want to make sure everybody knows why we think it's so important to care for trees. There are so many benefits that they provide to our community as a whole, but also to individuals. And some of those benefits include that they lower air temperature. They give us shade, they make it cooler, they lower our air conditioning costs for our buildings. Healthy mature trees increase property value as well. Trees help clean the air and water. They do that through removing particulate matter from the air and by slowing stormwater flow. They also provide privacy for us in our homes and can dampen some sound as well. And then shady areas with trees are very welcoming places. People are more likely to linger longer. So it's a great, trees provide the opportunity for us to build community because they give us the space to hang out outdoors. So there's two main areas to consider when caring for trees: what's below ground, which is the roots, and what's above ground, which is our trunk and the canopy. So let's start with what's below ground. A healthy tree needs healthy roots. And there are a few different factors to consider when thinking about what to provide for trees to make sure that their roots are healthy. They need adequate soil volume, so they need space to grow and to get all of the resources that they require. They need air space or pore space in the soil to get the oxygen and water that the roots require to support the tree's life. And good soil texture means that we've got a nice mixture, and the texture is important because it helps with water flow in the soil. With soil nutrition, there are macro and micronutrients that trees need to survive, and those roots are responsible for bringing in a lot of those nutrients. And then healthy soil supports all of the biotic relationships that a tree needs. So with mycorrhizal fungi, bacteria, nematodes, all the larvae that lives in the soil, everything that's there helps support a tree's life. And the very best thing you can do is to mulch your tree. It's the number one thing that I recommend for all tree care, is to provide mulch or some kind of organic layer around the roots of your trees. And it's one of the easiest and most affordable options for caring for your tree. The best type of mulch that you can use is what comes from the tree. So these leaves here in this photo are from a red maple tree in my front yard. And in the fall, they blanket the ground. And leaving those leaves would be the best thing I could do for that red maple. Here's a photo of my front yard. And as you can see, like, you can't really see the leaves right now. That's because we've realized over the years that our leaves end up just blowing into the street and into our neighbor's yard next door. So I don't want those leaves to go to waste, because my neighbor has a landscape crew that bags all of the leaves and takes them away. And then a lot of the leaves that go into the street just end up in the storm drain. So what I end up doing with the leaves that fall from these maples is move them to other parts of my yard where I know that they can stay put. That way we'll still get the benefit of providing a home for insects overwintering, and I'm still keeping the leaves there to help improve the soil on my property. So some of the leaves go in the backyard, some of them go in other beds. I try to leave as many leaves as possible right there underneath the red maple. Like, I kind of know how many won't blow away. And then in the spring, we add another layer of organic mulch. We use a hardwood mulch to go around our red maple trees because they're hardwood trees as well. and that mulch is heavier and stays put. We order the mulch from the landscape supply company. You can also get free wood chips from tree service companies if they're in your area. You can get on the list. But then also you could use pine straw as well, or any other organic material works well for trees. I don't recommend inorganic mulch. That means like rocks or shells or anything, at least not here in Atlanta in the Piedmont. It can get pretty hot here in Georgia, and that inorganic material like rocks tend to hold a lot of heat right around your plants and your trees. Rocks and other materials like that are recommended in areas that are super dry, like desert climate, or anywhere that xeriscaping works well. But here around your trees, the best thing is something organic. Mulch helps improve soil texture as it breaks down. It's adding more organic material back to the soil, so it's going to help improve the texture of the soil and give you an organic layer on the top soil horizon, or like the very top of your soil. It also helps hold moisture in the soil longer. So when it rains, that water that's in the soil won't evaporate it as quickly if there's a layer of mulch to help shield it from the air. The mulch helps suppress other plants from growing. So if you're worried about lawn creeping up next to your tree or weeds growing, the mulch can help slow down their growth. You'll still have to weed in the mulch because you'll get new things seeding in, but it can help at least alleviate some of the pressure to weed. Also, mulch helps reduce compaction and erosion by absorbing energy. So mulch will help slow down erosion because it absorbs the energy of raindrops when it rains. So when a rain falls from the sky, it's got a lot of energy and it hits the ground. If there's loose soil or bare soil there, that raindrop might move away some of those soil particles and just wash them away. But if there's an organic layer on top, like mulch or leaves, it helps absorb the energy from that raindrop, and it will keep it from washing away the soil. Mulch can also help reduce compaction in soil because it absorbs energy from whatever is on top of it. So it could be pedestrians, it could be people walking around, it could be your lawnmower, or maybe a car, hopefully not, but some people do park in their yards. So all of those things that will be compacting the soil and taking away that pore space can be reduced by adding that mulch layer to absorb the energy. It's like a cushion on top of your soil. It also adds nutrients back to the soil as it breaks down. As those microorganisms like bacteria and fungi break down the mulch, it adds some nutrients back to the soil. Some other great things you can do to help your roots is to make sure that your soil is healthy. If you suspect that there might be an issue, you can get a soil test done. Here in Georgia, the University of Georgia's Agricultural Extension Office offers soil test kits. I think they're about $15. You can order them, they'll send you the test kit, and then you can mail off samples. They test for things like nutrient levels, pH. They can even test for compaction by measuring the bulk density of the soil. So when you send in your soil test, you select what type of test you want done, and they'll send you the information back. You can also hire an arborist to measure things like compaction and nutrient levels in your soil. Some of the larger arboricultural companies in the Southeast have labs that they can send away their samples to themselves. And then one last thing to mention about protecting the roots and keeping them healthy is keeping people off of the roots is really helpful. So planting some kind of border or using a fence, something that will discourage people from walking all over your root zone is really helpful. This photo is from Piedmont Park, and I think this is the dog park. They put out a lot of mulch because it helps protect the soil, and also they have a lot of dogs running around, so they need some kind of like softer layer for them. And so I think that's why there's that fence around that tree there to protect it from the dogs. Don't worry, that little girl got out. I've seen her since. Also, water is really important for trees. Our new trees that we plant, we need to be monitoring it very frequently, like weekly or bi-weekly, to make sure that they're getting adequate water. So if you have a new tree you've just planted and it doesn't rain much in that week, you would need to add supplemental water. We generally say if it doesn't rain like an inch in the past 7 to 10 days, you need to water your tree. For mature trees, they can typically get by with rainfall. But if we're going through a really long dry period or a drought, then it might need supplemental water. And in that case, a good way to water your tree is to set up either a drip hose or a sprinkler. And you can set out a rain gauge to measure how much an area is getting. We recommend about an inch when you water, an inch of water. So once you get to that inch, you can move the sprinkler around to different parts of that root zone on your tree. And the critical root zone that I mentioned is out to the drip line of the canopy. So like to the canopy's edge, the tree canopy's edge. That is the key area to focus on. Tree roots go beyond that, but we know for sure that they're going at least that far, and we want to make sure that we focus on that area for both mulching and watering. Okay, so pruning. Why do we prune? We prune for healthy structure because that makes strong trees that live long lives and provide all of those benefits that we talked about earlier. We also prune for clearance to keep trees out of the way of pedestrians and vehicles and anything that it can be inhibiting. We prune for damage to prevent decay from spreading in trees. So we want to prune out any damaged limbs that may have gotten injured from maybe a vehicle or a person who's walked by and snapped a branch. Later in life, a tree might need risk management pruning, which is something you would want to work with an arborist to decide if your mature tree needs that risk management pruning. And by risk management, I mean like if you feel like there's a target that your tree could potentially damage if it were to fail or lose a large limb. And that's what we mean by risk management. And then the last reason that we recommend pruning is for aesthetics. I personally think that good aesthetics follows good structural pruning because I like to see trees grow to their maximum potential. So if we plant an overstory tree, I want to try to prune it to have like a strong central trunk and get really tall and big and shady. And for me, that's great aesthetics. But beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and everybody has different desires. So some people prune for different reasons. Pruning for structure is most effective when a tree is young. You can have the most impact in a tree's life by pruning it in its first 5 years. We prune most of our trees upon planting at 3 years, at 5 years, and then sometimes beyond that as well. If the tree needs it, if we can do it, and if it's a smaller tree, like an understory tree, we can usually prune it again at 5 years. Prune a tree yourself until you can no longer safely do it. So if you're pruning from a step ladder or with a pole pruner, do what you can for as long as you can. But once you get beyond using just a short ladder or a pole pruner, you'd most likely need to hire someone more experienced to help you. And pruning is a specialized skill. There's a lot to learn about pruning a tree and being able to help it and meet its needs. So if you're interested in learning more about pruning trees, especially pruning young trees, you can join us at a pruning class. We actually have virtual Pruning 101 classes available now on our website. It's under the Pruning Basics on that resource page. So if you'd like to learn more, go to treesatlanta.org, choose resources and look for the Pruning Basics. Then once you've completed Pruning 101, you can join us on our in-person hands-on classes where we practice together and we work on a lot of different species. So you get a lot of experience in pruning different types of trees. When your tree gets big, make sure to hire an arborist who can climb the tree or at least do it in a manner much more safely than what you could probably do on your own. Definitely don't attempt to climb a tree and prune it yourself. We recommend pruning to the ANSI A300 standards. These are standards set by the American National Standards Institute. They were written by the International Society of Arboriculture and the Tree Care Industry Association. And you can order copies of these standards through either one of those organizations, and their accompanying best management practices that goes more in depth about the pruning practices. We keep these, of course, because we prune a lot. And if you come to our pruning classes, we're going to be teaching you what is set out in these standards. The best time to prune is in the fall and winter because that's when you can see the tree the best. Especially for deciduous trees that lose their leaves, you can see all of the branches and get a good feel for what the structure of the tree is when it doesn't have its leaves. We at Trees Atlanta do most of our pruning in the spring and summer because we're so busy with tree planting in the fall and winter. We just make sure to not remove more than 1/3 of the live crown in the tree at one pruning visit. We coach our volunteers in like which trees are tougher and you can remove more from, but I think that the 1/3 live crown ratio is a good rule of thumb to stick with. And some common questions I get during pruning classes are, do we dress the wounds with anything? And my answer is we generally do not put anything on pruning wounds. So we don't paint those pruning wounds. We don't put any kind of like tar or anything on them. It's generally not recommended and really not needed. There are some very specific pests that might be prevalent in your area when you prune at a certain time of year, but these pests are really a concern for our older, mature trees. And if you're hiring an arborist to do your pruning, they're going to be aware of those types of pests. So there might be like really rare occasions when an arborist might recommend dressing a wound with something, but generally it doesn't happen. People ask a lot what to do if they see utility pruning done that they feel like is not following the ANSI A300 standards. So we sometimes see contractors, subcontractors for our utility companies out doing pruning. And if you ever notice that their pruning is substandard, you can contact that utility and find out who their contact person is for the area where you noticed the work. Like, for example, Georgia Power has foresters assigned to different regions of the state. And if you have any concerns about the pruning work that they're doing for power lines, you can talk to a forester about the work. I've had a few meetings with foresters before and they've been very helpful. Also, sometimes people ask if we recommend topping, and topping by definition is making these cuts that are not back to other branches or buds. And it's usually removing like the central branches in a tree. So no, it's never good for a tree. Never let anyone top your tree. If you've got a height issue, that's more of a wrong tree for the wrong place type situation. So we always recommend that people plant the right tree for the right place and prune their trees for good structure. On that note of topping, a really common thing that we see is topping of crepe myrtles. It happens a lot in the winter time here, like in February. And it's really not good for crepe myrtles and very unnecessary. So we recommend against topping crepe myrtles. In fact, crepe myrtles need very little structural pruning at all. They're super tough species. And if I saw an oak tree that had two branches pushing up against each other, I would want to address that while pruning. But a crepe myrtle with two branches pushing up against each other is really not an issue. That tree can live for 100 years, 200 years, and be fine. I think that this topping myth lives on because crepe myrtles are so tough that they respond to the pruning or topping by putting out a lot of sprouts the following growing season. They're very tough trees. They can grow a lot of sprouts once they've been topped. So I think people think that it's okay, and that's what the tree needed. Generally, it doesn't make for good structure, and they're kind of ugly after they're topped. Also, that new growth that the tree is having to put out, like all new branches that year, is going to have a lot of very young, tender leaves on it, which will be more susceptible to powdery mildew, which is also just unsightly, not pretty at all. So don't top your trees. Let crepe myrtles grow. They're beautiful and vase-like shape when they've grown to their full height. And if you want a dwarf crepe myrtle, just make sure to pick a cultivar that is small. There are lots of different cultivars of crepe myrtles, so you can find a dwarf variety if that's what you need. There were quite a few questions that you guys submitted before this or upon registration about vines. So I just wanted to cover that really quickly. Most native vines coexist peacefully with trees, and we don't have to address them. They can grow up trees and really not cause a problem for them. It's the non-native vines that become a problem for trees. And a lot of these invasive vines like English ivy, kudzu, wisteria, and winter creeper, and honeysuckle, those vines can become an issue for the tree, and we recommend removal. So English ivy in particular is very worrisome for trees because 3 reasons. English ivy, when it grows vertically up into the canopy, can shade out the tree's leaves and prevent them from photosynthesizing. So they're going to be starving the tree of the food it needs. English ivy, it can also provide more weight. They're like way down a tree, so that if there is wind or any other force, the tree could be more likely to fail because of the weight. And then the third thing is that English ivy is evergreen, so the leaves are on it year round. And if it's covering your tree, you may not be aware that there are other issues going on with your tree. So if there's a wound or a cavity, something in your tree, you may not be able to see it with English ivy covering it. So on that resource page on our website, there's even more information about removing vines. But briefly, what you need to do is cut the vine with hand pruners or a folding saw at about chest height. Make sure you're cutting all the vines all the way around the tree. You don't want to cut into the tree. Just cut the vines and remove them down to the ground. You don't need to pull the vines out of the tree. Pulling vines down could create a safety issue for you. You may end up pulling a branch out of the tree that could injure you. But before you start removing any vines, make sure that you've correctly identified all of the vines in that tree. There could be multiple species, and you could end up removing a beneficial like native vine from the tree by accident, or you could accidentally cut into poison ivy, which would create potentially a health issue for you as well. So make sure you know what you're cutting before you get started. Our upland forest here in the Piedmont typically doesn't have a lot of ground cover layer. It's mostly the organic material like leaves and branches on the ground with plants scattered here and there. But if you just really want a ground cover in your yard, here are some plants that are a good alternative to English ivy. We have the native Pachysandra, which is called Allegheny spurge. It's a common name for it. It's fairly fast growing and dense. Green and gold also spreads really well. It's pretty fast growing. They both grow in shade, which is wonderful because that's why a lot of people plant English ivy. And then partridge berry is a slower growing plant, but what's cool about it is it has those little berries that are really great for wildlife. But you can also just leave mulch. You don't have to plant anything. All right, so when you should hire an arborist. when you have any tree health issue that you need to diagnose, or you're curious about, if you are doing any construction on your property or you're doing drastic changes to the growing conditions, such as grading a property or adding a lot of soil, putting in a retaining wall, or something that might affect your tree, it's good to have an arborist come and assess the plans and help you decide or help suggest what you can do to help your trees. If you have storm damage, like a lightning strike or branches that are broken, it's great to have an arborist come evaluate that and help determine what the next steps are to help your tree. Anytime you're pruning on big trees, it's good to hire an arborist. If you're working near utility lines, you need somebody who's certified to work near utility lines. Really anything that has to do with trees that you need help with or you're not sure about, it's great to have an arborist come check on them. There are two types of arborists that you can hire. The first is a consulting arborist. They're usually independent of the tree service companies. They'll come and look at your trees and write out a prescription for what would help your trees be healthier. They don't complete that work necessarily. They give you a plan for what you need to do for your trees, and then you can hire out that work to a tree service company. Tree service companies also have arborists on staff, and they can assess your trees and they can make recommendations for the work to be done. They'll give you a quote or a bid for the work, and they'll perform the tree work themselves. Some people prefer having a consulting arborist come first because they want an unbiased opinion. They don't necessarily want the company that's going to be doing the work to recommend what needs to be done, because they feel like they may potentially recommend extra things that they don't really need because they want the work and they want the finance or the money. The Georgia Arborist Association is a great place to start when you're looking for an arborist. They have a list of their members, but what I like about their list is that it explains the type of work they do. So it explains if they're a consulting arborist or if they're a tree service company, if they provide multiple or lots of different services, it'll list out those services as well. So if you're looking for something specific, it's a great place to start. The International Society of Arboriculture also has a list of its members, and you can view who's certified, and you can get all of their contact information through their website as well. And it's great to look for people who are certified from the International Society of Arboriculture and the Tree Care Industry Association. Both of these are professional organizations, and people who join them generally care about the work that they do. They're going through continuing education and staying up on the standards of the industry. ISA certified arborists also agree to follow a code of ethics. So clients can actually file complaints against them through ISA. As for recommendations from your friends and neighbors, like being able to get a reference from someone is really helpful, and get multiple bids whenever you're doing the work. The lowest bid isn't always the best, so be sure to review them and take into consideration the work that they're doing and how they've recommended that they'll do it. The more detailed the specifications, the better. I think a very vague bid is not helpful. You end up having to ask a lot of questions. And if you've never worked with an arborist before, you may not know what questions to ask. So details are good. And then always hire someone who's insured. You can ask for their certificate of insurance. You can even call their insurance company to confirm if you need to. Let's see how we're doing on time. Okay. This is one of the last things I want to talk about is specific to Atlanta's tree protection ordinance. So those of you who live in the city of Atlanta, this is for you. So trees on private property are overseen by the Arborist Division, which is under the Bureau of Buildings, which is in the Department of Planning. Trees on public property, like in parks, or in the rights of way, are overseen by the Forestry Department, which is under Parks and Recreation, or which is under the Office of Parks in the Department of Parks and Recreation. I think the new ordinance that will hopefully be passed sometime this year designates that all permitting will go through the Department of Planning going forward. So hopefully that's a change that we see so that we have better communication and so that it's easier for citizens. The key things for homeowners to know is that you need permits for removal. Any tree over 6 inches in diameter at breast height requires a permit for removal, except for pines. That's pines over 12 inches. Not sure why that's different, but it is. There are exceptions for invasive species, and you can find that list of invasive plants that can be removed up to 12 inches on City of Atlanta's website. You can just like search for the tree protection ordinance and it'll come up. Dead, dying, or hazardous trees also require permits, but they don't have to be posted like the other permits that for removal have to be posted with signs. I've got examples of signs here on this slide. This orange sign is posted 15 days before the permit is given. It's supposed to be posted for 10 days to alert people that the property owner has applied for a permit for removal. On the 10th day, the yellow sign is posted, which means that the period of time that you can make an appeal is open. There's only 5 days to make an appeal. So if you live next door to somebody who's applied for a permit to remove trees and you're not so sure that they've gone through all the proper steps to do that, you have 5 days to file an appeal with the Arborist division. Then after the 5th day, if there were appeals made, they'll post this white sign. If there were no appeals made, the permit is given and they can move forward with their work. If you remove a tree without a permit, you can get fined. Even if the tree would have been eligible, the law is that you have to get the permit before you remove it. Now it's different outside the city of Atlanta. This is just for Atlanta. When people apply for tree removal permits, they have to submit site plans for what they're doing. So if they are renovating their house and the trees are in the buildable area of the lot, they have to provide site plans that label all of the trees on the property and the boundary trees. Boundary trees are trees that may be on a neighboring property, but the root zone is on the property that's being discussed or applying for the permit. So appeals are only available to residents and business owners within the MPU where the permit has been applied for. And you can see all of the permits that are applied for on the city's website, but if you need to see the site plan to find out, exactly which trees are going to be removed, you contact the Arborist division to get copies of those site plans. So the City of Atlanta has a web portal where you can apply for permits. You can also see all the applications for permits in the city. So if you see your neighbor removing a tree and you want to know if they got a permit for removal, you can log into your account and search for their address and find out if a permit was given for that property. There's a lot of different things you can look at in this portal for permitting. It includes not just the Arborist division, but like all building and code enforcement and planning and everything. And I think there are links to it on the city's website, but I always just like Google Accela, Citizen Access Web Portal, to be able to find it. Okay, and there was one more question that was repeated upon registration. How do you know if your tree is dead? So I included some photos to explain that. If your tree is young, you can just use the scratch test. So you can use your fingernail or something sharp like a knife and just remove the outer layer of bark. And if it's green underneath, then that tissue is alive. If it's brown underneath, that tissue is dead. So if you're dealing with a young tree and you want to know how much of the tree is dead, you can just check all over the tree, just do a little scratch test and see if it's green or brown. And if you are trying to prune out the dead, you can just, scratch test all over the tree till you find live and prune back everything else that's dead. If you're dealing with a larger tree, you're not going to be able to reach some of those branches to do scratch tests. But there are other signs to look for. So if it's in the middle of the growing season and suddenly all of your leaves turn brown, that could be a sign. Or if there's a tree during the growing season that doesn't have any leaves, it could potentially be dead. If a tree has like curled ends or like looks windswept, like it's just like withering and dying, that's a good sign that it is dead. The branches might be brittle and snap easily. There won't be any buds. There might be bark just starting to slough off the tree. I think the most confusing situation is when it's the middle of the growing season and suddenly all the leaves turn brown, because it could be that your tree is on the way out, but it also could be that you just have a pest that has caused your tree to defoliate, and the tree might grow new leaves either in that season or in the next growing season. So that's when I very highly recommend that you contact an arborist who can come out and help evaluate your tree and help you decide if they think the tree is going to be able to survive or if they need to do removal. There are certain pests that trees get that arborists do recommend removal immediately, things like pine bark beetles that can move from tree to tree fairly quickly. They might recommend that you go ahead and remove. If you lose a tree and you want to replant, Trees Atlanta has a replanting program for front yards. If you live in any of these participating cities, you can apply to get a front yard tree either free or a very low cost on our website, treesatlanta.org/yard tree. You can also find it just by going to our menu and looking for our tree planting program. Some of the participating cities are Atlanta, Brookhaven, Chamblee, Decatur, unincorporated DeKalb, and Sandy Springs. Trees are fairly limited, and we're taking applications now for our next planting season, which is October through March. So if you're interested, apply early so you can get on the list, because there's a finite number of trees that we can do every year. And if you want to learn more about tree care, come out to one of our classes or take a virtual class with us. You can also attend one of our walking tours. We have regular tours on the Atlanta Beltline Arboretum. We also do tours in our neighborhood arboreta and parks throughout the city. And then you can learn a lot by volunteering with us. So if you come volunteer, you can learn about tree planting, lots of tree care, forest restoration, invasive species removal, a lot about native plants and tree identification as well. So I hope this has been helpful. I'm happy to answer any questions now, or if you think of any later, feel free to contact me as well.
Thanks, Susan. We do have a couple questions, and that was very informative. And I will also recommend the Beltline walking tour. It's fantastic. Biased opinion, I know, but it is fantastic. Okay, so let's see. We got a couple questions, and for those that have joined during the program, you can type any of your questions into the Q&A feature and we will ask them. So let's see. So I'm going to start with back at the tree ordinance section. We got this question. They were asking, what if the tree is on their neighbor's property but could damage their structure? Is that involved in any way?
Yeah, so I'm mostly familiar with Atlanta, so I can speak to that. If you have a tree of concern, then I recommend contacting the Arborist division and scheduling your arborist for your region of the city to come out, or your quadrant of the city to come out and look at it with you. You'll need to document the issues, especially if they find that there is like a concern, a valid concern about the tree. You have to document it, provide notice to your neighbor. There are like certain steps that you'll need to take that they can help guide you in to make sure that you're protecting yourself. Also, your homeowner's insurance can provide some guidance in that as well. If it's something you're concerned about that could potentially cause damage to your home, then you can reach out to them as well. There are very similar steps that they recommend usually, that where you need to notify the other homeowner about the issue. This is mostly if you're, this is a neighbor who, sorry, Jen, a neighbor who is like in denial about their tree.
No problem. Great, thank you. So while we're on the topic of the tree ordinance, we have a question about our favorite crepe myrtle. So is that covered by the tree ordinance? This person in particular thought it was a bush.
Yeah. Crepe myrtles are included in our ordinance. I think the only exceptions for things you can remove are invasive plants like mimosa and chinaberry, things like that. But yeah, so crepe myrtles are just a little bit trickier to measure when it comes to permitting because they're multi-stem. So I'm not actually sure what the city's guidelines are for measuring multi-stem trees like that. There are different methods to measuring to get what the DBH is, since the law is that you have to get a permit for anything over 6 inches in DBH. I'm not sure how they measure. So I'll have to find that out. It's not outlined in the ordinance.
That's okay. All right, let's see. Next question. Do you know of general price ranges for arborists?
You know, arborists are expensive. They are highly skilled and specialized in their work, and insurance is expensive. So let's see, the last time I had tree work done at my house was like 4 or 5 years ago. I had some trees removed and pruned, and I think it was around like $2,000 to get several trees removed and do some pretty heavy pruning. So I think it varies from company to company, but if you're having a lot of work done, it can get really expensive. I think it's good to, just like when you hire an electrician and you want to like do as many projects as you can at once while you have them there, it's the same thing with an arborist. Like, have them do everything in your yard that you can at one time to help save money.
That is expensive, but it's a lot of work, I'm sure, especially the bigger the tree.
Yeah.
Well, kind of while we're on that topic, I'll shift to a question about pruning. What did you mean when you said the live crowns in regards to pruning?
Oh yeah, so the live crown is where the live branches are. And live branches usually have leaves, especially in the growing season, you'll be able to see. So that pruning rule is not removing more than 1/3 of the tree, basically, the live crown.
Makes sense. All right, next up we have a question about if you bought a tree that was in a pot but didn't plant it immediately, is there any chance for survival?
Yeah, you just have to keep it watered. Trees in containers dry out quickly, just like any plant in a container. So you may need to water even more frequently than weekly to keep it alive in the summertime. But I think, they might actually be asking about root growth. So trees do eventually get overgrown in containers. So you don't want to keep them in a container that's too small for too long. If you need to keep a tree in a container longer, you can always move it into a larger container, just like you would when you're repotting a house plant. You can repot your tree while you wait to plant it in the ground.
Great, thank you. All right, so we have 2 questions left, but definitely submit any last minute burning questions you have about trees. So back to the utility companies, can you remind us who we call if we notice anything out of sorts?
Yeah, so the 2 main utility companies that have been pruning are in Atlanta. We have Georgia Power. I think pretty much all customers in Atlanta, that there may be an EMC or something in your area if you're not in Atlanta. So contacting your power company would be it. I think Google searching Georgia Power Foresters would be helpful. Also, the other company that we sometimes see pruning is communications. So like AT&T is one that a few years ago, they put in the fiber optic lines around the city and ended up doing some pretty serious damage to trees. So we had to meet with them and talk about better ways to get their fiber optic lines up without damaging the trees. In that situation, it was a little bit harder to get in touch with someone. But what I did was contact my arborist, or that was in the forestry department, because that was in the public right of way. We contacted the council person. She was helpful. And then we just reached out to whoever we could find at AT&T, and eventually they got us to the right person and we met with them on site. Did that help answer that question? I hope
Yes.
so.
That was very resourceful. Good call for the council person. So does Trees Atlanta or others maybe that you know of have a service where they plant trees for residents for a fee?
So planting trees for a fee. We do have our front yard tree program where we will come out and plant the tree for you. Our staff and volunteers come and plant the tree.
So, and is that like if they already have the tree there, not necessarily you guys supplying?
Oh, yeah, okay. No. So, but if you purchase trees from us at our tree sale, we have an option to pay for us to plant your plants for you. But if you purchase the trees on your own, we won't come and plant them for you. But if you're interested in learning how to plant properly, you can always come join us on a volunteer project because we give like a 20-minute presentation on how to plant properly at the beginning of that. So you can come learn. We also have a video on our resource page on our website that shows how to plant. So you definitely learn.
And is it your tree sale or the plant sale is in October of this year?
The tree sale is in October. We have a native plant sale in the spring as well. We have pre-ordering available for our tree sale. That's going to open up in September, I think the beginning of September. And then pickup will be at the end of September, beginning of October.
Perfect. Definitely make sure you guys check that out. It's always a really great event. Okay, so one last question I see here. Can you explain the best practices for protecting the root zone? You had mentioned not to walk in this area. Does that mean it's bad to have benches or other small structures and furniture under the tree canopy? And that's a great question because you do see that in like parks, for example.
Yeah, if there's not that mulch or organic layer on top to help protect the soil, then we do end up seeing soil get compacted in parks where there's high traffic. So that mulch is the best thing you can do to help protect the roots. If you've got a nice layer of mulch, then you can still put a bench there and walk underneath it and it'll be protected.
Great. So I think that was the last question that I see. So I didn't know if you have any closing comments. I was going to make sure you talked about the tree sale, so we did cover that.
Yeah, thank you. I do have one more comment, something that I didn't mention, something that we're hopeful about for the future. In the tree ordinance rewrite, we're really hoping that some of the recompense funds will be able to go towards providing funding for people like senior citizens or low income households to be able to do tree care. So if this is something that's important to you, you can contact your city council person and let them know that it's very important to you to have that in our new ordinance. We think that the city council will be voting on this new ordinance in the next few months.
That's great. I'm glad you mentioned that. So definitely make sure you talk to your council people and Lisa if you didn't know about that. It seems like something that would be good for all of your program participants.
Yeah, it's something we hear over and over again. Hiring arborists is so expensive that it's needed.
Definitely. That's great. So make sure everyone, when you hang up tonight, go call your city council person and ask for that. So thank you again, Susan. That was wonderful. I always learn so much, and I know our participants did as well. And thank you all for joining. I see a lot of familiar names in the chat, and anyone that's new, I appreciate your time tonight. If you want to join us again, which I hope you do, July 28th will be our last workshop in this series, and that will be with our friends at Heads Plumbing. They joined us last year in 2020 to talk about some plumbing basics and are coming back this year to teach us some more good stuff. So you can go to beltline.org/empower to register for that. And again, that's on July 28th at 6 p.m. I hope to see you there, and I hope everyone has a great night. Thank you again for joining us, and Susan, for your time. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate all your good questions.